But yeah, I've just kind of been, oh, sorry.
No worries. No, I feel the same way. I've been so busy. Where am I? Oh, there you are. Okay. I was like just lost in the internet for a second there. Yeah, I feel you, and like no worries. I'm really excited to see what you came up with. Do you want to introduce the subject?
Well, today, like, I know that, like, we discussed that, like, instead of doing, like, capitalism, like, specifically in our title, we decided to just kind of do something more of, like, Black resilience, along with, like, different stuff that, like, you know, usually comes up within Black History Month, but also just, like, Black history in general. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
But yes, I am. But for those who are just now coming on, my name is Melora. I am 17, and I consider myself a musician, creative, and a creative, an activist, an intersectional feminist, and I am also POC. Yes.
Thank you, Melora. Yeah, for anyone who this happens to be their first episode watching, we do this through Core Press, which is a feminist publishing company in Tucson, Arizona, where we both live. As we say in our episodes, our opinions are our own and don't necessarily reflect those of Core. We just do this through their platform. And yeah, Melora pretty much covered it. We're going to talk about Black like strength and resilience, and how that strength and resilience and the work that Black people have done has been exploited by white people. And yeah, my name is Piranha. I'm a drag artist, and I do all kinds of art. I'm queer. I make a lot of art. I like a lot of stuff. I like animals. Yeah. And oh, duh! I'm an intersectional feminist. That's why we're here. That's what we're here to talk about. Where we talk about feminism and how much capitalism sucks. I'm a leftist. Yeah, we watch our old episodes. Psh, whatever. Yeah, go back and watch our old episodes. We don't need to tell you. Melora, your face keeps freezing on my screen in like funny ways. Right now, you're like on my screen. Okay, wait. Now you're back to normal.
You freeze on my screen. Should I? Maybe you should start. Because I want to see what you have to say.
I can't hear you.
Oh no.
Let's say my internet connection is unstable. Uh-oh. I can't hear anything.
But yeah, I've just kind of.
Okay, wait, now I can. Yeah, go back and watch our old episode. Started playing on the YouTube on accident. Oopsie. Okay.
But yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear.
Okay. Well, you should go first because I feel like mine is just. I feel like mine is more like different. Like, I have like topics and then I have like notes underneath each, and I feel like mine would be more like. Would probably make more sense as like after you say what you have to say, I can go in and just like, say some things if you mention certain things like that. So yeah, they're more like different talking stuff.
If you want to interrupt me at any point to say anything, like definitely like, yeah, I don't want to, what was I gonna say? Sorry, I'm
No,
opening my
it's
phone
terrible.
to make sure I don't talk for too long. I have a little timer going because I talk too goddamn. I'll just do my presentation and you can interject wherever. Okay.
Roger that.
So.
Canva's so pretty.
All right. Yes, I like making pretty presentations. This always happens though. Whenever I go to share my screen, it takes. Okay, there we go. So, let me start my little timer thingy here because I definitely don't want to take up all the time because, you know. So my presentation is about queer Black intersectionality. In this presentation, I want to share inspirational people who fought for Black and queer liberation. You know, Black on one hand, queer on another, and then the intersection of that. I usually talk way too much, as I said already, but in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on sharing the facts and then first person accounts. I owe these people and many other queer Black people for the rights that I have today as a queer person and hope to amplify their stories and words rather than speak over them. And as always, I accept critique as well. I definitely don't want to talk over any of these people, and I recognize, like, as a white queer person, the ways in which the white queer community has appropriated Black culture, has fucked over Black people, the queer community, the white people in queer spaces have historically been not great to Black people. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of my presentation, but I just wanted to, put that out there and, like, as a white person, just be clear that, like, I'm not, this is, my hope with this is to amplify those voices and show my appreciation. Okay. So first, I wanted to talk about these two women, Addie Brown and Rebecca Primus. They were two Black women who wrote love letters to one another from 1859 to 1869. They are some of the earliest American representations of queer relationships, and particularly queer Black relationships, and even more particularly queer Black women and representation of that. There were about 150 letters that were found, all from Addie to Rebecca. Rebecca's letters are lost. They're probably somewhere in the world. And like almost all queer couples throughout history, some historians argue that they were just really close friends. We'll read all the quotes and you can decide for yourself whether that sounds true to you. But to me, that sounds like some bullshit. A little context, they were both born when slavery was still legal in 13 states. They were both born free, as free as they were born not slaves. It's not known exactly where they met because, they didn't mention that in the letters, but likely it is assumed that Addie worked for the Primus family. They all lived in Connecticut, and the Primus family really liked Addie a lot, and Addie was an orphan and very poor, and the Primus family was middle class and had other people working for them. So it was assumed that most likely they met when Addie was working for them because she worked a lot of domestic jobs. But that's speculation. Their correspondence often was romantic and at times even erotic. They both rejected marriage in their early lives, which they wrote a lot about in their letters, not wanting to get married to men specifically. And in their early lives, I already said that. They rejected marriage, but eventually in their later lives, they both married men due to societal expectations and economic need. Here are some excerpts from their letters where they talk about racism that they experienced and their love for one another. So on the side of racism, there wasn't a lot mentioned because, you know, that's not really, that wasn't really what they were talking about very much. But I thought that these excerpts were really interesting to show like what the experience that they had during that time was. So Rebecca writes, I hope there will be justice, impartial justice, given to the colored people one of these days. I was reading the Civil Rights Bill for colored and all people in the Communicator, as it has passed both houses of Congress with amendments. I'm very anxious to know whether President Johnson has signed it or not. I thought that was really interesting just because it's like, you know, a really historical event. Also, I wanted to note in a lot of these, it says sick, which I had to look up, SIC. It means that something was like edited for clarity. So like if a word was spelled wrong or something. So in the next one, it has that. It says, I have come to a decision stand that people shall pay me for my work. I don't care colored or white. Addie Brown often worked unpaid jobs, domestic jobs and other jobs. She would sometimes go for weeks working and just not get paid. And they both had talked about in different letters the ways that their work was exploited by white people. There was also the excerpts that I didn't that I wasn't able to get full quotes of that talked about that talked about slurs that they were called, talked about the fear that they had for people that they lived with, people that they cared about, and different acts of racism that they witnessed. So on the side of love, the quotes that I have are, I never shall love any person as I do you. Wishing that I was in your loving arms and you would be imprinting, I believe it meant sweet kisses, sweat kisses is kind of weird. And then another quote, it seems I can see you now casting those loving eyes at me. If you was a man, what would things come to? Which I thought was really sweet and sad at the same time. I know. The next one says, oh, my dear Rebecca, when you pressed me to your dear bosom, oh, how happy I was. Last night I gave anything if I could only laid my poor aching head on your bosom. Oh dear, how soon will it be if I can be able to do so? And then I ran out of space, but I have a couple more. So she began another letter. I truly wish that I could exchange pen and paper for a seat by your side and my head reclining on your soft bosom and having a pleasured chit chat with thee. And then another one, what a pleasure it would be to me to address you, my husband. And if so, do you think for one moment you would be where you are without me? And I don't know how historians can be like, yeah, no, that's just real close friends. She literally said that she wished she could marry her. Like she said, if only you was a man, what would things come to? Like that's not friends. That I don't know how people thought that was like, that's just not, no. Like, oh, just anyway. These two women subverted gender, racial, and sexual expectations and were total badasses, and they thank them for teaching people that queer Black women have always existed. Now, the next person I wanted to talk about is Bayard Rustin. He was a gay and civil rights activist and socialist. He helped organize numerous huge protests, including the Freedom Rides, where Black people got on buses and refused to sit at the back of the bus, bus boycotts, and the March on Washington. His involvement in the march was controversial. People used his involvement in the march against the march, saying that a sexual pervert and a communist was involved in the planning, that people should not attend, but that obviously did not work. People hundreds of thousands of people attended. Where am I? In addition to these protests, he worked to integrate Black people into existing white unions because he thought unionizing was really important, which I agree with. He assisted refugees and went on humanitarian aid missions. He worked to protect the properties of Asian Americans while they were in internment camps. And after many years working behind the scenes, he became a public figure in the gay rights movement during the 80s. He was arrested multiple times in his life, once for his sexuality, another for refusing to be part of the military, and once for refusing to sit in the back of the bus, which he spoke about in an interview, which I quoted here. And I'll now give time to read that. I think that's a really beautiful quote, in that I just think he is such such an important figure, and people don't talk about him very much. He worked as a advisor to Martin Luther King, and had such a huge impact on these events, and goes ignored. Now I will show a clip of him talking about his views on employment. There were actually I'll just note that there were actually a lot of queer people involved in the March on Washington. I was actually going to talk about Josephine Baker again, and then I realized that I had already talked about Josephine Baker, and I was like, oh, I don't have enough time. But she also spoke right before Martin Luther King at the March on Washington, right before his famous I Have a Dream speech, and she was bisexual. So there were many people involved that were queer. Anyway.
With their white counterparts in competition for dwindling work. We asked Bayard Rustin.
The first thing that I see that is going to happen is that we have to wait perhaps a year or so longer, but I think it's inevitable, that a part of the collision will be that Negroes and whites will be fighting each other for what few jobs are left. We have already begun this process unhappily. Then I think white unemployed, largely out of the example that Negroes have given in the interest of civil rights, such groups as the miners in Hazard and miners in Tennessee, they will then adopt the methodology and the spirit of the Negro Revolt. This has already happened. Now, no one is going to pay any attention to the job problem, quite frankly, merely because Negroes are without jobs. This is not because people are devilish, but because the Negroes have been without things for so many hundreds of years. Who is really moved by Negroes being without things? When, however, the white unemployed join with the Negroes in creating social dislocation in the interest of jobs, something will happen. We now know that you cannot get freedom for Negroes by marching in the street, period. You cannot possibly get jobs for Negroes in a society where millions of white people are unemployed by asking for your share of that cake. White people do not get their share of it. What we have to do is to say that cake no longer is a good cake to eat. Let's get a new cake in which the first and fundamental objective would be we must separate pay from work. The combination of the power of the machine and the skill of the machine, where we now know, no matter what we do, we will never again put all Americans who are capable of work back to work. Teenagers, the aged, and the minority groups. And therefore, the first principle for which I stand, and Negroes will have to increasingly stand for it, as will the white miners in Tennessee and elsewhere. The question is no longer how much does a man get for work, because there is not enough work and cannot be. We have to establish the social principle, make it a part of our constitutional way of life, that a man is paid a decent wage whether or not this society can put him to work. And this is a profound and radical idea, but it is an idea which will emerge. The Negroes will understand it first.
I'm running a little over time. So if you want to take over, Melora, you can, or I can. I have this is the last person, but it's up to you.
You can continue. It's okay.
Okay. I mean, totally interrupt me at any point. We're at 15 minutes now. So I'll just try to do this one quickly. I'll just go quickly. So James Baldwin was born August 2nd, 1924 in Harlem, New York, under extreme poverty. In 1956, he wrote Giovanni's Room, one of the earliest American books about being gay. He was an incredible essayist, novelist, playwright, and debate artist, debating racists and fellow civil rights activists, including Malcolm X. He wrote on classism, homophobia, religion, and racism, and the ways in which all of these intersect. Here, I'm going to show an interview with him, and I think it's really heartbreaking to listen to both of these speeches from decades ago and how much they still resonate today.
I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter. So I'm forced to be an optimist. I'm forced to believe that we can survive whatever we must survive. But the Negro in this country, the future of the Negro in this country is precisely as bright or as dark as the future of the country. It is entirely up to the American people and our representatives. It is entirely up to the American people whether or not they're going to face and deal with and embrace this stranger whom they've maligned so long. What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger, I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. The question you got to ask yourself, the white population of this country has got to ask itself, North and South, because it's one country, and for a Negro, there is no difference in the North and the South. There's just a difference in the way they castrate you. But the fact of the castration is the American fact. If I'm not the nigger here, and you invented him, you, the white people, invented him, then you got to find out why.
So quickly, the last thing that was when I was going to talk about Josephine Baker, and then go back. Okay, there we go. Finally, I just wanted to point out some connections that these individuals that I've talked about have. I wanted to first note that all of these people talked about the connection between their being Black and poor. How in all three of these cases, they faced exploitation of their labor. And in the case of James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin, even after their deaths, their works were ignored and credited to other people, frequently white. In all three cases, they were unable to make choices about their lives and careers, and were unable to live authentic lives because of the control of white people. I insist that other queer white people learn about the queer people of color and all the ways in which learn about different queer people of color and all the ways in which white queer people have continued to perpetuate racism in this way and the appropriation of Black culture, and I pledge to do the same. I also wanted to point out that, between Bayard Rustin and Bayard Rustin and James Baldwin were both socialists. Obviously, we don't really know about the first two, but I think that that's also an important little thing to leave people to start thinking about on their own. So that's what I have. That's my presentation. I totally went over, and I'm sorry about that. Off to you, Melora.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to like do my screen. Okay. So when we originally met like last week, I wrote down like a huge like I have this paper full of like all these like different things that just like flooded through my mind because I literally talk about this stuff like every day of my life because of like, I'm like, for me it's just interesting because like I always like try to tell people that obviously for me it's like my experience is going to be different because I don't experience racism, because like of how I look. Like I pass for white. And I think that there's like this whole, and when I think about like, sorry, I'm like jumbling my words, jumping to different places. But that's not to say that like, I revel in that because I don't revel in that. Whenever I think about like my experience compared to like someone like my brother Rex, who's like a lot darker than me and visibly black, like I always think about the fact that like, like he one day unfortunately like he could be subject to like police brutality. I mean like already like he's like experienced like a bunch of different like racist experiences at like the different schools that he's gone to here, which is why he's had to like go to different schools and transfer because like people have just been like repeatedly racist towards him and a lot of different like stuff going on in like the schools and whatnot. And it's like, well, I don't experience that at all, so it's like very hard for me to like as a sister like to see like different situations like that happen to like my own family, like, and just to also like see it happen to like someone like my mom who's like she's visibly black but she's a lot lighter than my brother. So but she's also experienced like she's experienced police brutality. I'm not going to go into that, but she's experienced like police brutality. She's also like for example been mistaken for like like my mom is, for context, my mother is a tenured professor at the U of A. She's been a teacher for a very long time. And yeah, like I said, she's a tenured professor at the U of A. She's also the chair, which is like the head of the Gender Women Studies department. So she like for a very long time since she was a teacher, like she's always experienced like these different types of things. As an example, like specifically here, she's been mistaken by like like a white person, like for example, as like a copier, as in like in the copy machine room, like for paper. Like she like has been told to like copy paper for like white people. And she's had to tell them that like she's not a copier person, she's a tenured professor. And she's also been told like that like she was in a building one time and she told me that she was like in a building one time actually like right across the street from where I go to school, Tucson High. I always forget the name of that building, but it's like a dorm building that has like different office spaces and like meeting rooms that different for like different like people that need like those spaces, whether it's like students or not. And so my mom was at a thing because I'm not sure if she still does it, but she's the head of like, I believe she was there for a Wildcat Writers meeting and she's in charge of that. So, and when she was there, like a staff person was like telling her like, we don't take in people from like across the like from the outside or from the streets or whatever, and blah blah blah, as my mom was like making something in the microwave. And like I think about these things all the time because I'm like and I just feel like it's so easy to like spot these things that whenever other people like don't understand their own privilege as a actual like not me but like other full-on white people, like it's just very difficult for me to like even try to be like, how do you not see that you have privilege? Like all this privilege, like you would never be mistaken for someone who just came in off the street. You would never be mistaken for someone who was like a copy machine. Like like my brother whenever the election was going on, like in November, he was riding his bike from our old house to go to Little Caesars and back. And there was like a Trump caravan, and he like came back and he told us that like one of the racist Trump supporters tried to like run him off the road and like skidded him, and like, you know, the car like touched his leg, you know, trying to like run him off the road. And it was very like, whenever I heard that, it just like was very hard for me to hear, because it's like, you know, like my brother could have been severely hurt. He could have been very hurt. And I always, like, whenever I think about Black history, I think about like what I come from, because like, you know, like I do, like I have
Sorry about that. I got disconnected for a second.
You're okay. Yeah, you were like frozen for a little bit, and I was like, are they frozen? Are they not frozen? Oh no, they're frozen again. But I guess I'll just continue. But yeah, like whenever I think about like Black history, I always think about like where I come from, because like I have
I like everything's like dang. Oh, I hate
Wait, what? You like froze and then you like just randomly came on again. Oh no. You keep freezing. But anyways, but yeah, I always think about like where I come from, and I just think about the fact that like, you know, to learn about all these like different things within like Black history and like my own history is just very like, I don't know, like eye-opening, obviously, but like, yeah, just to like think about the fact that like, you know, I am like, I have like like I have like my like Black family members. Oh, it's just me. Oh no.
my Zoom is just losing its mind. It just keeps knocking me off. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I should probably like move on and stop being all like whatever about myself, because like I know that I have like Black ancestry, but like in terms of like the stuff that I wrote down, besides like, you know, like just to like make a quick note of like talking about like
The last thing that I was able to hear, you were saying during the I don't know if you can hear me right now. Can you hear me right now?
Yes, but you keep freezing. You're muted.
I'm sorry, it's freaking out. Can
It's
you hear
okay.
me now? Am I all
Yes, I
good?
can.
Okay.
Yes,
I can hear
you
you
are.
well now too.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just as a like, okay, just to like recap Piranha, what I was saying is that like during the election, like in November, like my brother came home and was telling us that while he was like riding his bike to Little Caesars, like from where we used to live, there's like a Trump caravan. And so as he was riding his bike, one of the people in the Trump caravan who was like in a truck, like tried to run him off the road and like touched his skin, like on his leg, like their car did, as he was like on the side, and he like fell off his bike because of it. And but like, yeah, like I hear all these experiences and I just think to myself, like, you know, I don't have to worry about myself, but at the same time, it's like I always worry about like my family every day, you know. And like there are people who don't have to experience that, you know. Like I, for example, I don't like the police, but because of how I look, I know that they're not going to target me in the same way as like they would someone like my brother. I mean, like when I was in like Fry's like a few months ago, there was like a police officer there with like a gun, and he was like walking by. My brother was like listening to his music, and he was like skidding around on his cart by like, you know, like how people get on their carts and they like push themselves like they're on a scooter. He was doing stuff like that, and he was just being like a little bit like just like a tad bit like crazy like he usually is. And like, you know, like I had to tell him, I was like, hey Rex, like maybe we like shouldn't do that type of stuff, because I don't want like, you know, people to think that you're like causing trouble, or like, you know, because there's a police officer over there with like a gun, and I was like really worried, and I was like, you know, like I don't want to see you like die in front of me. That's just something I don't want to do, you know, like having to like just think to myself all the time, like I always feel for the Black community when someone's life is taken, you know? And I always feel for the Black community whenever those lives that are taken are not, like, you know, as cared about by, like, other people who try to post about it. Because, like, I just think of, like, last year's situation with, like, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and how nothing's really been done, and how, like, you know, all the time we just move on. It's like a constant thing. And I see all these celebrities being like, donate here, donate there. And I'm like, why don't you donate your salary? Like, because like, I can't. I can't donate. I don't have that kind of money to donate. How about you donate? Instead of, like, asking us to basically do everything, you know, just like people always ask, like, Black people to do everything and, like, educate, and kind of, like, you know, it's almost like implied that Black people have to do the work to, like, liberate themselves.
Right.
Instead of, like, you know, white people recognizing that it's the oppressor's job to recognize that they're oppressing and to, like, stop oppression. Because unfortunately, like, white people are not going to, like, listen to, like, minorities, you know, like,
Yeah.
because those minorities are seen as below. They're not seen as, like, taken serious enough. And it's like, white people have to do the work to, like, dismantle oppression and racism and all these other issues that are caused by them.
Right.
Like, we can't repeatedly, like, exhaust our resources and our energy to do all this stuff whenever people do not listen. I mean, people don't even listen to, like, the Black Lives Matter, like, movement, you know, they combat it by being like, all lives matter and all that other type of stuff. And it's just so exhausting, because it's like, you know, we're never really going to get justice if people keep combating and not recognizing their privilege and all this other stuff. And whenever I talk about that, I always think about, like, for me specifically, I always think about, like, my favorite MLK quote, which talks about, like, the white moderates. So I will read that, but it is a bit long. So I will warn everyone. But I believe he I want to say, I feel like this is one of his quotes from when he was, like, in jail for, like, I forget how long. I think it was like maybe like a few days or a few weeks, possibly a few months. But it was one of his many different, like, letters that he wrote while he was in jail. And he said, "First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more developed to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection," which is something that I rarely agree with, because I always see problems with, like, the white moderates. And yes, I'm talking about white liberals.
Yes.
So,
I recommend
like,
anyone who hasn't read that letter that I recommend every white person who hasn't read that letter to me, because
yeah.
I've read it a few times, and it's like, again, like what I said with Bayard Rustin, and like everything that is said in these interviews and letters and stuff is still relevant today. Like, one of the things that Bayard Rustin said was that white people won't care. Basically, what I'm paraphrasing, but he said that white people won't care until it happens to them.
Well, of course,
and that he said also that, like, nobody is surprised when I can't remember his exact phrasing, but like when Black people don't have something, like he was talking about employment. and I think that was really relevant. And when you were talking, that quote was that quote was coming back to me, because I feel like that's like really just still accurate today, like with with the all lives matter, with the people who, you know, post once and then and then move on, because we just normalize it, you know.
Yeah. Also, sorry, my lips are like really chapped, so
Mine too.
that's why I keep putting on chapstick.
Everyone is on. No, I have my chapstick on me too. I got my.
It's a must. It's a must.
My bubble yum chaps.
That sounds adorable. I love that. I just use the cherry chapstick.
Yeah.
But yeah, like as I was saying, like, and I always think about that when I specifically think of white liberals, specifically because I feel like people have like a very like common thing that they do where they like separate themselves from like the racist, awful whites. And like they use that as like a way to be like, oh, like we're not bad, you know? And I think that a lot of people, they just support things so that they're not called racist. And I've experienced a lot of like, I mean, like, for example, I'm just going to say this as like a thing, like, there have been like 1 or 2 times a few years ago, like whenever I've said something and like the people who've like, you know, called it like questionable have like, or just like, you know, because I myself have been called like racist like once or twice by like people who didn't understand what I was trying to say. And unfortunately, like I've had to like re-explain, and then they're like, oh yeah, no, I get it. I get what you're saying. Like, never mind what I said. And I'm like, yeah, like maybe if you listen, you wouldn't call me that, because like, you know, but I do think that a lot of people try to like say things specifically because like, or try to support things simply because they don't want to be called racist or labeled a racist. They just want to believe that they're better than the other white people. And then they don't acknowledge their own whiteness and how that affects like their presence in society and their experiences by then separating themselves from their own whiteness by literally being like, white people are like, oh, those white people. And it's like, no, you yourself are still white. Like, you know, like you're whiter than me, like DNA wise, like you're whiter than me. I think you can acknowledge the fact that your privilege still oppresses others, like even if it's like,
if you're not, no, you're totally fine. You finish. Sorry, I totally started talking.
No. I was just gonna say that, like, yeah, like, so it's just very annoying whenever I hear people say that and they're like trying to like, you know, separate themselves, or they're trying to like be diverse and then yet not have a diverse space, you know, like and they're all like liberal. It's just like very hard for me to believe that like that certain things are, you know, what they say they are, or like what they're trying to advocate for, because it's like, you know, I see barely, like, I'm not going to say which club, but in one of my clubs, like it's a very big club, and so like they're always like, it's full of like white liberals. I'm just going to be like whatever, because but there's barely any like black people or barely any minorities like in the space at all. You know, like I'm probably one of the closest things they have to like a person of color, and I look just like them, you know. And it's very like, I always see it though, like whenever I walk into a space, I always notice when there's like not barely any minorities, or if there's like no black people, or if there is a room full of black people, you know, like I always recognize that. And so when they're talking about like diversity and they want all this stuff, and it's like, but you still have a majority white space, you barely have any minorities in here. Like, how am I supposed to know that that's what you want if you're not actively trying to like seek out POC or like other minorities to like join your club, you know? And it's a pretty popular club, so it's like you have to like think about things differently in order to like get others to actually want to join, and you actually have to want diversity if you like continually like say that that's like what you want. Like you can't just say, oh, like, yes, diversity. Like you have to like want it in order to make it happen. So like but yeah, the white moderates are crazy, man. I mean, like I like in my English class, I could just point out so many different things that have happened over the year that I've just been like, oh my god, like all the books first off, again for context, we've read Frankenstein, which yes is written by Mary Shelley, but Mary Shelley was white, so and it's about a white man who I don't like because he basically thinks that he's the victim in it all, and it's like, no, Victor, you're just stupid. And then we read Heart of Darkness, which I will have to say is like my least favorite book ever. I hate that book so much. But I'm not gonna use Frankenstein to like talk about, but I'm gonna specifically talk about like Heart of Darkness and like what happened with that. And then we also read like Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart right after we read Heart of Darkness, and that it was so good. And it was like so good. And he's actually from Africa. I believe he died though, like a few years ago, unless he's still alive. I feel like whenever my teacher was going over the presentation for the book, it said that Chinua Achebe had died. But it was I love Things Fall Apart. It's actually a trilogy, I found out. So there's like 2 other books that I want to read. But yeah. And then right now, we just got done reading Macbeth, which is so boring. Oh my god. The play version, which should not be read, it should just be watched. And right now we're reading The Tempest, which is also a Shakespeare book. And that but anyways, with Heart of Darkness, that was written in like the late 1800s after like and the book, and like it's like a 3-part like book. It's kind of like I don't know, it's a self-narrative because it's like a true story kind of, which is like, if you've seen Apocalypse Now, that is what that movie is like loosely based on, even though that movie takes place during the Vietnam War. But Heart of Darkness takes place during like the late 1800s, and it takes place in like the Congo, I believe, when King Leopold was there exploiting resources and Black people and cutting off their limbs and all of that, and doing all these awful things just to get ivory and to be rich because capitalism. Also, he built a railway through there, I believe, which is also why he needed like, well, I say needed, like he actually needed them. Like, no, he needed the people of the Congo to like help him build it, whereas he forced them to build it. And he
said it like a textbook way. They're like,
yes,
well, this person needed the help of this group of Black/indigenous people to come help him do this thing that was totally gonna help them because they definitely needed his help. That's how like every textbook writes those things.
Yeah. And like, you know, I just think about it and it's like that book was so racist. Like the dude who wrote it, Joseph Conrad, who actually went to the Congo and was there during that time, because he wrote it in like 1895, I want to say. And like he just like throughout the entire time, he just like, it's okay, first of all, it's called Heart of Darkness, specifically, I think, because he like explores the fact, like, you know, you're going like into like the heart of like the jungle, and like you're seeing he's like describing like, you know, different like Native Africans as like these like animals, and like, you know, just like decrepit beings who are like creatures, and like, you know, so like thin because they're being starved, and that they look like masses, like black huddled masses, because they're so thin and starved and exhausted from being forced to work. They're like in chains and all that other stuff. And he's like describing his little journey to like go get the main character Kurt. And it kind of like the book, it's interesting because it looks at like how in his eyes, how white men are turned wild when they venture into the jungle, you know, because like the jungle makes you crazy, apparently, in his eyes, and it's called the Heart of Darkness because he like goes into the jungle, and like it's just really bad. And I mention that to say because a lot of my class is filled with like white moderates who like overtake the conversation, and it's not that that's like a bad thing, but at the same time, it's
Well,
kind of
it
just,
is.
like
As I'm a white person, literally.
Yeah, like I don't know, it's just like interesting to like see different people's reactions, because a lot of the times when we read like different racist things, I feel
Right.
like the people aren't actually identified as racist in my class. They're kind of just like identified as like, oh, it's just a commentary or like a perspective and whatnot. I'm like, Joseph Conrad was literally racist. Like he described England, like he described that any nation under like, because we were reading like this other book. My teacher made us read an excerpt from a book about King Leopold. And there was a chapter in there about Heart of Darkness, and it basically gave a little background on Joseph Conrad, and I believe he's Polish, but he moved to England when he was young, and he grew up in that culture, and he like began to love it. And he not only had like mine shares in Africa, he had like, I believe he's like quoted as saying that like, any nation conquered under England is a better nation or something like that or whatever. And it's like, so you're telling me that dude made a commentary as he says that, colonization is essentially good. I'm like, okay.
I literally read a book just like this. My computer's about to die. That was literally a book about like some white dude doing his little like pretending he was a colonizer, like following in the footsteps of this colonizer. And like, it's so annoying to me that like, first of all, I have read so few books by Black people. And the only times that I've written that I've read books by Black people in school was literally, it was talking about like slavery, and like it's never, there's zero times where they allow Black people to have joy in academia. But what I was gonna look up was, no, this is totally gonna derail the conversation. I was just about to talk.
Yeah.
No, that's gonna derail the conversation.
Yeah.
Never mind. But
no, it's okay. Yeah.
My computer's gonna die. I completely like the being in classrooms is like being in classrooms as a minority. Like teachers don't seem to understand. Like every time that minorities are brought up in any way, it's like brought up with the option for debate. Like I remember being in middle school and people debating queer rights, as I'm sitting there like,
Yeah.
no, that's me though, you can't do that. I'm sitting right here.
Yeah.
And like being a part of conversations where the same thing was happening for people of color, and like just the way that, particularly in conversations about people of color, how the actual people of color in the class never got to, their voices weren't heard on those subjects, and there was an option for their rights to be argued. Like that is just bonkers to me that they let that happen in classes.
Yeah, it's just like really like crazy. But like to like summarize what else I was gonna say, because I'm not gonna go into like a whole huge. No, you're totally fine. I completely, it's okay. But yeah, like not to like, because then I'm probably just gonna like move on and like quickly say things before we wrap up. But to finish out what I was saying, like, when I compared like my experience to reading Heart of Darkness to like reading like Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, obviously I like Things Fall Apart way better. First of all, I'm just gonna say that right now. It's a great book. You should read it. It's wonderful. Also, I really want to read the other two books that he wrote in that trilogy. But it was just interesting when I saw like comparing like my class experience to both, because with Heart of Darkness, first of all, I feel like a lot of the times, anytime like Conrad wasn't only racist, he was also sexist. But within Heart of Darkness, I felt that like racism was definitely, racism is definitely way more prevalent in that book than sexism. I just want to say that, and like within the book, yes, it's wrong that he says those like, you know, different sexist things, but he says like two things that are sexist, and the second time he says it, it's like a reiteration of what he said at the beginning of the book. And I mentioned that to say that like that's literally what people brought up instead of talking about racism within the book. They literally only talked about the fact, like a lot of people, especially like just like brought up the fact like, oh my God, he's like a sexist pig. And like, you know, that's like whatever. And it's like, yes, he is a sexist pig. Not gonna lie, he's a sexist pig. But like when racism is way more prevalent within a book, I expect that to be the main thing that people talk about instead of derailing the conversation on something that was reiterated twice within the book. Once at the end and once at the beginning, and he basically said the same thing. And it's like, yes, we can talk about that as a brief mention, but when that overtakes the conversation, I see a problem. I see a very huge, like, prevalent, yeah, of course, it's avoidance, but like, it's a huge problem that I just saw, you know, and like, we wrote essays for that book, which I hated doing. We talked about that book so much. It was just really weird, and I just felt like a lot of the kids who spoke just said really weird, questionable things about it when they did talk about racism, kind of like defending Conrad in some weird way. And it's like, no, we don't idolize like racists and slave owners by saying that it was just commentary. Like, I'm sorry, if they're saying something that's racist, it's racist.
And they're always like, it was a different time. And they also love to bring up that it was a different time when slavery happened.
They always bring it up. They always bring that up.
They always want to put it on. They're like, well, not me. It wasn't me, so I don't have to take accountability. And what they don't understand is that we, as white people, profit off of things that happened in the past. We still own the majority of land. We still own the majority of companies and money and everything because of slavery, because of all of these things. Like, it's just right over their heads. It's frustrating.
Yeah. And I compare that, like, my class experience to my class experience while we were reading Things Fall Apart, because that's probably my favorite book that we read all year, because it's the only book that we've read that is by someone who is a person of color.
Yeah.
We read it, like, and it is like a response to Heart of Darkness. Specifically that particular novel takes, like, Things Fall Apart specifically takes place in like Africa, and it's like in, I want to say, like the later 1800s, because they mentioned Queen Victoria, and that was at the time that was going on. And it explores like colonization and like how, like, you know, white people just like kind of come in and like slowly take over by like oddly hiding their racist agendas. And it explores that, but it mostly explores, like, you know, different like tribal relations and like social like hierarchies, and like it explores it in a way that's very, like, you know, simple, which I liked about it. Like, it, like, the book, like, the novel was very like simple, and it just seems like really like, oh, like, this is really easy to understand. And I feel like, you know, Achebe kind of like, you know, perfects that, and being like, yes, like, it is simple to understand, like, that this is how like different like clans work, and like different like tribes, like tribal like and villages like work, you know, not all, but like that specific one. And it just explores like a family and how, like, you know, their family falls apart due to colonization, while exploring like social hierarchies, like traditions, culture, and just like all that different type of stuff. And it's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful book. And I just think it's very, like, at the very end, it's very simple. But we wrote no essays about that book. The only book that we never wrote essays about this year. When we were reading it, no, like, a lot of people confused the names or didn't remember them, or mixed people up. All the characters in it are Black except for the colonizers. And like, for those people, they barely remember. They either remembered like one or two people's names, they got people confused and went on with their lives. They just didn't correct themselves, or they just didn't remember people's names and they would just describe it. And I feel like that's something that I see like often like and we didn't really talk about the book either. So like it's just interesting to me to see that, like, you know, we have a book that's actually written by someone who's from Africa in academia, who's like, you know, beloved and celebrated, has won multiple different awards, you know, talking about like a response to Heart of Darkness and being like, see, this is actually how, like, you know, like a clan could work. This is actually how like certain things work. It's not about like, you know, like no one is like, you know, a creature. No one is an animal. Like these are people, you know? And like it's just sad when I like hear people like, you know, not being able like to know how to pronounce their name, or just not willing to like try and say their names, or forgetting them, or just forgetting like who they are. And it's super disrespectful because it's like you would never ever forget other people's names within like, you know, the white books that we read. I mean, I saw the same pattern while we were reading The Tempest. I'm not going to go into The Tempest, but there's like a character in it who I believe is like POC, who's like enslaved, and like no one remembered his name. And it's like, you know, that's the only person whose name you don't remember. Right. But we have these complicated names like Trinculo and Prospero, and y'all remember those? Like, and so yeah. I don't know, like I just see all these different comparisons and I'm just like, how come like those are the people that you forget? How come these people aren't talked about? How come we didn't talk about like, you know, Chinua Achebe's novel, like Things Fall Apart? Because that book was really beautiful and I really wanted to talk about it.
I think we should talk more about this on another episode because this is a really important thing. And I think just thinking about like why we decide certain books are classics and are important to read when they like they're boring and don't talk about anything important is really like an interesting subject that we should talk about in the future. Like, why do we need to read Hamlet? I don't know. But yes. I think probably since we're like, I think 10-ish minutes over. Final, let's do final closing. You know. Yeah. Those were words. That was a full sentence.
Yeah. I mean, because like, okay, it's my fault because I didn't get to talk, like, because I talked about like different things that I didn't write down. I did talk about some things that I did talk about some things that I wrote down, but since I didn't get to talk about some of the things that I did write down that I really wanted to talk about,
talk about I think next week or next week. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we can talk about them next week. But like, just as like a final word saying, like, you know, like, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that like, especially like just like overall in Black history, is that Black people, like Black folks, have experienced like a tremendous amount of like hardship, and like to a point to where like people just don't understand, or like are not willing to understand, but are also just surprised about. And it's like, I don't think you should be surprised that white people basically treated Black people like animals. That's how they were considered. They were not considered human. They were considered property, and they were enslaved. They, like, you know, Black people were actually considered to be like 3/5 human at the time. Not even full human, 3/5. You know, and I just think about like that evolution all the way up to today. And it's like, you know, I'm actually like from like on my mom's side, like I'm actually like descended from like slaves who were like taken from Africa, you know, and I just think about like that like stuff, and I'm just like, you know, a lot of like people don't realize like all these different things. It's like, you know, we all look different, you know, like not all of us are like, some of us are lighter, some of us are darker, and there's like different complex understandings within those like different types of things, you know. And it's just very like interesting to me that like certain people think that it's over, that they don't have to care about it as much, or they don't have to do anything, because it's like work still needs to be done. I'm just waiting for white people to understand that they have to pick up the torch and just finish it, because it's like we like my family been fighting, like other people that I know been fighting for hundreds and hundreds of years. And you know, like I think about like specifically, like, my stepdad was telling me that, like, about a quote that Muhammad Ali was saying about that said when he was like drafted to the Vietnam War, and he didn't go because he didn't want to. And I think he specifically stayed behind. Like, I think he like avoided being drafted by like, you know, and he was just saying that like, he said like, first of all, he said that he didn't want to go to Vietnam because he didn't want to kill other people that were like, also being like oppressed. But specifically, he said, also a bit of a longer quote, he said, I want to die. I'll die right here, right now, fighting you if I want to die. You, my enemy. And as he's talking to like white people. Not like, like other like minorities that are like, not like other like Asian minorities and whatnot, but like, like you, my opposer when I want freedom. You, my opposer when I want justice. You, my opposer when I want equality. You want me to go somewhere and fight for you? You won't even stand up for me right here in America, for my rights and my religious beliefs. You won't even stand up for me right here at home, and I can send it to you. But yeah, it's like just like all that type of stuff. And I just think about it and it's like, yeah, like, like people just don't understand. It's like you want me to like, you want like minorities, you want Black folks to like do all these things for you, the oppressor, the colonizers, and it's like, no. Like also like I was recently watching like a Malcolm X interview, like a brief interview where like the white man who's interviewing him asks him like if he hates all white people.
Right.
And Malcolm was like, X was basically saying that like, that like Muhammad teaches them, like, that like to like love their own people and to like, and that the white man should be like left to fend, like, to take care of themselves. And that like to him, the question was kind of like had like way too much nerve behind it, because it's like, like white people kidnapped, enslaved, and sold off Black folks by like labeling them as chattel and merchandise. And that even after, like he was saying that even after like the Emancipation Proclamation came out, like, or like, was like put into like doctrine and whatnot, and actually like, I don't know, like, yeah, like, put into doctrine and like, into law, that like, that white people have used the law to their advantage in order to keep like Black people like, below them in like some way, shape, or form. And to him, like that type of question, it's just like, you have the nerve to ask me if I hate white people when you've done all these awful things to Black folks and still do it today, and I agree with that.
Yeah,
but,
no,
yes.
for sure. And I think, there's a lot to unpack there, and we have gone way over, but
yes, that's my fault. Yes.
no, I really appreciate, all of the things that you shared, and I really appreciate your vulnerability, and I always love listening to the things you have to say and talking with
Thank you. Same for you. I also like listening to what you
like
have
everything
to
you say. I'm just like, yes, and I want to say, it's so hard for me as like to not just like talk and talk and talk, because there's so much that I want to say, but I like really, I think that it's so hard to like just shut up and listen for me, but because I just like
I'm the same way. And I think that like like of course, like I definitely appreciate that very much, and I'm glad that I'm able to like share certain things in like a safe space, because I know that not everyone is able to be afforded that privilege, or is able to get that privilege, or feels like they can speak in certain spaces. So I definitely appreciate like the safe space that you've helped create, like, for the both of us. And I always love hearing what you have to say as well, because it definitely gives me more insight, and also just like, more things to learn. And I appreciate that very much, because I love hearing you talk. But yes, since we've gone over time by a lot, we should probably end. But yes, but thank you all
Yeah.
for watching. We definitely appreciate it always. And Piranha.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. In closing, go pay some Black people. And
support Black businesses, everyone.
yes, and just go Venmo someone. Just do it.
Yes. Also, if you would like to learn more about like Black history, sorry, I'm like putting my hair up. If you'd like to learn more like or more like in-depth stuff or just like different like small facts about like the Black community and Black history, two specific Instagrams that you can check out are probably at African Archives, because I follow both, but at African Archives, which I love because I actually have learned different things on there that I'll probably mention the next time that we see each other. But and then also at Black History. And then there's also just a bunch of different things that you can follow, like different Black organizations that you can find yourself by looking it up, because I will give you those two, but you can like look up the other stuff alone, because I'm pretty sure that it's very easy to find that type of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But yes, but again, like at African Archives and at Black History.
Awesome. Thank you, Melora. I think we should continue this conversation because I think there was a lot more.
Yes, there was a lot.
So let's plan on continuing this conversation in our next live.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. And I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Guys.